Hello, friends, and welcome to Snap Take. This is Glazer of Snap Judgments, the official podcast of Marvel Snap Zone, and we have an OTA. That's right, it's the best day in Marvel Snap. It's new OTA day, and we have a new way of doing it. We're going to update a tier list of where these cards would fall on a Marvel Snap card tier list and talk about the tier the decks would fall in. I feel like this should give our dear viewers a much better idea of what these changes mean for the decks, the cards, and the metagame. Let's get started by talking about the first card changed. They finally freaking fixed Zabu. Zabu was a 2/3 on reveal. Until the end of your next turn, your 4 cards cost 1 less. He's now a 1/2. That's right, 1 cost Zabu. New on reveal. Give each of your 4 cost cards in your deck -1 cost. So if you've already drawn that 4 cost card, he doesn't do anything, right? So you really want to play him early with as many 4s as possible in the deck. I think that's really cool. I think this is really cool design. Do you go all in on 4s and have some that cost 4 and some that cost 3? Do you run those with Sarah? And then you'll have some 2s and some 3 cost ones that you can play together? Do you try and run this with like a Grandmaster and do really cool things? There's a million things to do with this. This is the biggest change of the OTA for me. I think that this is going to be huge. So this is still, however, way worse than it was as a 2/2 ongoing. But at that point, it was an S tier card and had a serious argument for being the best card in all of Marvel Snap. We don't need it to be that good again. This is way better than it was several minutes ago. This is way better than the old 2/3 on reveal that we just talked about. It was a C or D tier card when it was the 2/3 on reveal. It had some homes, but was probably closer to C. I think the 1/2 version of this is likely to be an A tier card. I think this is likely to be one of the best 1-drops in the game, which is annoying at least a little bit because this is still a Series 4 card, which means if you don't have it, you have to spend tokens or wait for it to show up in spotlights. However, it is, I believe, the single oldest card that is still in Series 4, so you're fairly likely to have gotten it at this point. This is meant to work really well with Shauna and Zabu. Not Shauna and Zabu, this is Zabu. Shauna and Kazar. So what this fundamentally means is you play Shauna, it can make Zabu, which is then going to potentially discount your Kazar, which I think is pretty cool. Or if you play this Zabu on 1 with Kazar in the deck, it's going to make that Kazar cheaper. That's really cool. I like that idea. It's a really nice thematic little touch here. I always like when they do stuff like that. This also separates Zabu from Psylocke because there was a fairly severe overlap between those cards prior to right now. You would just sort of decide which you wanted based on the number of 4s, but like they were both sort of trying to be played on 2 to ramp into 4. This might separate it in the Mr. Negative list, where I think it is fairly significantly worse than just running Psylocke and Ravonna, so that's worth knowing as well. Wiccan style decks are going to love this, and this is a boost to like Man Thing, this is a boost to Misery, Shang, Enchantress, all those 4s that have sort of fallen in and out of play, or like you run 1 or 2 of them in a deck. Now you want to run more, and I think that's really cool. I'm going to give you a sample deck for why I think this is an A tier card. This is a Zabu Wiccan list. I built this based off the pre-Quicksilver running version of the Andre Var deck, the FAK Andre Var deck that's been all over the meta. The Quicksilver version has a better win rate, but with Zabu as a 1/2, I'm not sure that's still the case. So instead of cutting all the 1s, we cut all the 2s except Hazmat and run Domino, right? Now we have all these 1s and all these other cards we can play. If we can get a cheaper Man Thing, a cheaper Wiccan, a cheaper Shang-Chi, that's a snap condition in this deck. I think that's going to be really strong. And you want to see Zabu nice and early for this, right? You can just drop Zabu. Domino is great here along with Maria Hill, because then you can play the Maria Hill 2 on 2, and then you can play Domino and another 1 on 3. You can do stuff like that. That's going to allow for extra play. I really want to Snow Guard here, but I think this is a good sample home for Zabu. We're going to see people are going to cook with this card freaking immediately. I would bet you by tomorrow morning's video, we have a new meta Zabu deck. It might be this, it might be something else, but this is a good sample for what Zabu is going to look like. All right, next up we have Hellcow. Hellcow has already been nerfed. What a quick turnaround. As Hellcow was too good in Hela. So this was a 4/6, activate, discard 2 cards from your hand. It is now a 4/7, activate, discard 1 card from your hand. They said Hela's play rate is too high, but its win rate was fine. The stat trackers we have don't show that, but it's possible. Like the stat trackers we have show this as a really strong win rate deck, especially after the most recent Hela nerf when everyone started playing Luke Cage. So they're showing this as like a 56-57% win rate deck, which isn't above their normal thresholds, but it is really, really high for Hela, which usually sits at like the low 50s, if that. So that's a fairly big jump. That means that the players who weren't using trackers were likely dragging down the Hela win rate. This makes the deck's high rolls way worse and increases the miss conditions. So Hela is much more likely to just like discard a blade by accident now than it was before, and end up with not much to do. The discard 2 was really, really strong. This goes in the deck still, but this was S tier in that deck, and now it's around a B tier deck. Sorry, a B tier card. So I think that this is a fairly significant nerf in that deck. Like now, do I want to go back to Corvus? Am I keeping Hellcow? I'm not nearly as convinced for this archetype. And if it's like a cuttable replacement level card, I think that's about B tier. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's still better than that, but I do think this is a really big hit. Cutting off half of the cards it discarded is a freaking lot. The deck, I think, also goes from a low A tier deck to a low B tier deck. I think it's lost a full tier. I think it's more or less back where it was before the Hellcow changed to activate in the first place. So this is a really big hit. If you hate Hela, you can celebrate. I think you're really fine. I don't think the deck changes unless we want to go back to Chorus, but here's an example. So for this deck, for this version of it, I'm not I decided to try the Symbiote Spider-Man version because I feel like I might need more discard now. And Symbiote Spider-Man on Blade, Symbiote Spider-Man Lady Sif, and Symbiote Spider-Man on Jubilee can give me sort of some versatility, right? I can Symbiote Spider-Man on the Lady Sif or the Blade if I need an extra big discard, or I can Symbiote Spider-Man on the Jubilee if I need to pull for Hela. Is that as good as Blink? Probably not before today, but now it might be with the change to Hellcow. This is the Fernet version of the Hela discard that won a recent tournament. So please do check it out. It also has a really, really high win rate. All right, they changed Widow's Kiss again. Widow's Kiss was a 0/0 ongoing. This has -3 power. Disable this ability if your side location is full. 0 -4. Destroy this when your side location is full. Your opponent's going to fill the location, and then they're going to fill the location and not be clogged. You don't know when they're going to fill the location, and this seems like a decent tool for a priority, but I think they just killed a S tier card. Like, I don't think this is playable in any real deck. Straight up, I think they just said this was arguably the best 2-drop in all of Marvel Snap, and now it is a bad 2-drop. So I'd put this tentatively as a D tier card. I just think it's bad. Everyone I've spoken to about this thinks it's bad. I think this is a bad card. This was the best card in Junk, the single best, most irreplaceable card in Junk. So Junk has taken a huge hit. We're going to talk about the Junk's new place in the meta because Junk got one other nerf. But now, anytime you're running you're running White Widow and not Kate Bishop, you just replace it with White Widow, which is way, way, way less consistent. I don't know what to say. It's really, really rough. This card is, I think, dead. I don't think you should run White Widow anymore. I hope I'm wrong, but yeah, unless you're running Red Guardian to kill that Widow's Kiss, this seems bad. Viper also loses, I wrote 3/5 twice, loses a power going from 3/5 to 3/4. This was probably too strong as a base card, as a 3/5. A 3/5 with that powerful of an ability since its last change to hit the lowest power card was probably too much. However, doing this right after the Widow's Kiss change really, really hits those Junk decks hard. You probably had to do it because Viper isn't enough. Viper isn't enough non-Junk decks that it makes sense. Excuse me. This is still an A tier card that's going to go in an absolute ton of decks. I have no doubt that this is going to go into almost all the same decks it did. Those decks are just going to lose slightly more than it did. The Junk decks, I think, go from S tier to B tier. Junk was in contention for the best deck in Marvel Snap, but they lost their best card, and a top 3 card got worse, which is absolutely brutal for them. Viper is still going in every non-Junk deck and every Junk deck, but it is worse in all of these. So let's look at one Junk deck and one not Junk deck. This is our not Junk deck. This is a deck that we covered this morning. It's Derek's Misery List. And you can see that Viper's still really good here, right? Viper can still hit Hood. Viper can still be miseried if you get filled with other junk. Viper can still throw over an Electro. It's just squirrels, all the regular bullshit it does. It just does so at 1 less power. I think that this is much less negative to Viper than it was, for example, to Nocturne, who also became a 3/4. Viper is still going to be excellent because what Viper really does is sort of irreplaceable without running a 5-drop. Meanwhile, this is sort of what a junk move clog deck looks like. Because I have to run Kate Bishop now, I want to add the Dagger Vulture package, so I ended up having to do like half junk, half move. This doesn't seem worth it to me. I don't know what else to say. This does not seem worth it to me. But I think junk is just way worse. It's possible that this list is really good, but I'm not confident in that take at all. Scream has been changed to a 2/3, but the problem is Scream, Kingpin, and Fist Tower no longer work with unrevealed cards. That deck wasn't good, and it just lost its best tool, which was Juggernaut. This was a B tier deck that got hit hard into at least C tier, and Scream went from a B tier to a C tier card. They told us they were going to do this before it was out of spotlight, so I'm not like terribly upset, and they did give it an extra power and compensation, which means one use is going to make it a 7. This can get up to a 219 now. When it goes off, it's still going to be one of the best, most powerful 2-drops in the game, but it's still an incredibly powerful 2-drop card that doesn't have a deck that's above C tier. I think right now, because of the lack of Juggernaut use, you have to not run Scream as a deck and run Scream as a package in another deck like this. This is Gregor2424's take on the Stinky Smooth list, where he added some more Affliction stuff, right? Scream here is an Affliction card. That's your scaling 2-drop, which makes a lot of sense. You're running it with just 3 cards. You're running it with Polaris, Spider-Man, and Arrow, and you're saying Arrow's some good stats, and like if I can use Arrow to get extra stats on Scream, Spider-Man, Polaris to get extra stats there, then you've got extra win conditions, right? I don't know. Is this any good? I think that it's still probably pretty good. It's just the Juggernaut versions are dead, and the all-in versions had to run Juggernaut. Is this package good enough is a question we're going to have to figure out together. We're going to have to play with, do some work with in order to get together and figure out. Grandmaster gets yet another point of power. He went from a 2-0 to a 2-2 to now a 2-3. He's better, and this was always a good card. This Grandmaster was always a card that you would like to play when you were able to. Its underperformance, however, I don't think is the result of its stats. I think it's the result of Cosmo being a meta card. They released Misery just as Cosmo became a meta card. Grandmaster is really getting good just as Cosmo is a meta card. So the problem is that Cosmo can be in one of 2 spots. It can be in either the place you play Grandmaster or the center location to stop it. If it had to be in the Grandmaster location, I think that Grandmaster would be way, way better of a card, and we wouldn't need all these stats buffs. I think it's that Cosmo can be in 2 spots right now that's absolutely wrecking this. However, this is a low B tier level card in some high B and low A tier decks. So this is still a fine card to run, replaceable most of the time in very, very good decks. One example is Crazy's Miserable deck. This deck had White Widow, so I cut it for Baron Mordo because I think Baron Mordo is ridiculously underrated. And if you're looking for a replacement for White Widow in decks that aren't super cloggy, please try Baron Mordo. But that's basically what this is. This list had a very minor clog sub-theme using Hood and White Widow and Viper. So you're fine just keeping Viper for Hood and using Viper's other as just a way to like chuck them a master mold or whatever other crap that might fill them up and cause them some trouble. Viper gets a little weaker here. Grandmaster's still really good. You still get a second demon, right? You can still get all the extra rocks or all the extra master molds, etc. It's basically your cheap version of Misery. The giant Cassandra Nova play is really, really cool. So I think Grandmaster is really good here. Fairly cuttable, right? Like not necessary. As long as you have Misery, you don't super need Grandmaster because you want to hit Misery and hit like Master Mold and Black Widow, that kind of thing, right? But yeah, it's a very good deck. It's a very good card, but it's not required. And hey, it has 1 more power. So if you're not seeing a ton of Cosmo, go for it. They finally gave Emperor Hulkling an extra power. Whoop-de-doo. As one of the few Emperor Hulkling owners, I feel very lucky. All right, so this is a D tier card as a 6-cost card, even if that costs Series 5. It's a D tier card that stays a D tier card. This is eventually going to be buffed again. They heard my make it a 5 idea, which I said literally the day this was data mined. Very first video, I was like, this should be a 5 cost that can make 6s, or a 6 cost that can make 5s. It would be so much more interesting of a card. So they didn't do that. They instead gave it more power, and I don't think it's going to be any good. Bluntly, I think this is going to be bad still. Arishem sort of likes it, at least, and Arishem is an A tier deck with or without this. So arishem being so weird means it can run this perfectly fine. Doesn't have to, but it can run this perfectly fine. Here's this deck from Ororong. This is an arishem deck that runs Emperor Hulkling. I think this is reasonably cool. Emperor Hulkling copycat in here, along with Cable, seems very cool. Ororong is a tournament player. This is running White Widow because it's, again, arishem. You can just run random shit in it. You can replace that with Baron Mordo just fine. And then it just says, sometimes Emperor Hulkling is something really cool. I don't know. There's not a reason to run this stupid card. I don't know what else to tell you. Okoye is buffed. She goes from a 2-2 to a 2-3, and they're going to keep buffing all these pumping cards until this is a thing. They're eventually going to hit a critical mass of pumping stats, and this will be a good deck. Okoye being a 2-3 is not that critical mass. Agent Venom is usually going to be better. This is only really going to matter when the buff deck fully exists. So a D tier card with in a D tier deck, and here's a nice D tier deck that runs it. This is Owie's Scarlet Boost deck. It's basically saying I can pump a bunch of stuff. So you run a Okoye to pump a bunch of stuff. I think Zabu goes in this deck really well right now, though, because if you can get Gwenpool out early or Scarlet Spirit out early, that's usually pretty damn good. So that's what you're actually trying to do with this. You're trying to get Gwenpool or Scarlet Spider out early, and yeah, like this is much cooler of a Zabu idea than an Okoye idea, right? But if you go Zabu into Okoye, into Gwenpool, you should feel pretty good, right? If you've got a Char Scarlet Spider in hand. I don't know. Is this worth the trouble? Is the juice worth the squeeze? No. All right, that's the OTA. What are my overall thoughts? Zabu is amazing. They crush junk. Hela is worse. Good OTA. I'm not sad. Let's do some Patreon thanks, and then we'll get out of here. Remember, we got 4 new decks for you and a bunch of weekend mission decks tomorrow morning. Our Patreon supporters are Abigail Giesel, Manager, Burnout, Irregardless, David J. Winfield, Direwolf, LAB, FaThorNewman, Good Dog Gamer, I Am Frostman, Jane Everett, Corbin, Prime Ryan, Ryan Burke, Caretaker League, Carrie, Black Die, Pyrofrost, The Goat Seeker, Time Falcon, Archangel 3K, Hollowed, Quid Pro Joe, Doc Fat Nick, Mr. Kerfuffle, Ginger Prime, Philip Rakovich, Chaplo, Kenny Logan, The James, Rob Silverman, The Bez, Exorcy, Skippy G, Simon Nyquist, The King of Bros, The Great Kazoo, Jessica Gamble, Woody, Kepsi Hoda, Ludacris, Quantum Kin, John Q, Jimmy McQ, Clam, 8th Age, Matza Pre-Models, Darth, Tater, Steven, Brian Coffin, Just Nate Martin, Jason Beat, Jake T. McDonald, The Fuzzy Long Spectrum Mix, Matt H, DJ Mikey Edgings, No Flex, Ocularis, Mr. Craig Sterry, BG, Jonesy, Two Ties, The Great Laura Devs, The Pirate King Tuccrr, The Homie Man, and of course Gunny T, where the T stands for. Tomorrow, I got something special for you. Also, this morning's video, which is on the screen right there, has 4 decks that are all from players who finished #1 on the Infinite Leaderboard twice, which I thought was a pretty damn cool thing to do. So go check it out, and I'll see you tomorrow for more Snap Take goodness. Deuces.